In 1971, Honda dropped a bomb on the motorcycle world with the CB754, 67 horsepower, 4 cylinders, and an electric start. It was built to crush everything on the road and dominate racing and Honda's image. But in a small workshop outside Tokyo, a 49-year-old man named Pops Yoshimura looked at that same bike and thought, I can make it faster. With nothing but a grinder, a few tools, and a dangerous amount of patience, he built CB750 engines that made 97 horsepower. That was 30 more than Honda's best. When those engines showed up at Daytona, they didn't just compete, they won. Twice. This is the story of how a self-taught mechanic from rural Japan outsmarted Honda's engineers, invented the 4x1 exhaust, and changed motorcycle racing before the factory even knew what hit them. In October 1968, Honda unveiled the CB754 at the Tokyo Motor Show. It was the first mass-produced motorcycle with a 4-cylinder engine positioned across the frame, a single overhead cam, and a front disc brake. The engine made 67 horsepower at 8,000 RPM from 736cc. That was more power than anything else you could buy. Honda launched the bike in America in early 1969, and by that summer, it was selling faster than Honda could build them. Riders loved the power, the electric start, and the fact that it actually worked every day without braking. British bikes were faster in a straight line, but they leaked oil and needed constant fixing. The CB750 was reliable and modern. In March 1970, Honda entered 4 CB750 race bikes at the Daytona 200. 3 of them broke. The 4th, ridden by Dick Mann, barely held together long enough to win. It was Honda's first Daytona victory, and it proved the CB750 could race. But Honda pulled out of racing right after that win. They had proven their point and moved on. Meanwhile, in Japan, Pops Yoshimura was looking at the CB750 and seeing something Honda's engineers weren't seeing. He saw an engine that could make a lot more power if you knew where to push it. Pops wasn't some weekend mechanic. He learned metalworking as an aircraft mechanic in the Japanese Air Force during World War II. After the war ended, he opened a small motorcycle shop near an American base in Fukuoka. American servicemen needed someone who could fix their bikes and speak English. Pops did both. He started tuning engines because riders wanted more speed. By the 1950s, he was building race bikes that won. In 1965, he moved from Fukuoka to Fusa, a suburb of Tokyo near another American airbase. A year later, in 1966, he moved again to Akigawa, a rural area where he could build a bigger workshop without neighbors complaining about noise. The Akigawa factory became the center of Japanese motorcycle tuning. Pops tuned Honda sports cars as well as motorcycles. He built camshafts by hand using oil stones and a 360-degree protractor. No computers, no automated machines, just Pops, a grinder, and decades of experience. When Honda released the CB750 in 1969, Pops tried to buy one right away. He broke his arm in a race and couldn't make it to the Tokyo Motor Show, but he placed an order anyways. It took months to arrive because the bike was so popular. When it finally showed up, it wasn't even one of the early sandcast models. It was a die-cast K0, built in September 1969 after Honda switched to faster production methods. Before his own bike arrived, a Honda factory rider named Koji Ota brought a CB750 to the Akigawa workshop. He wanted Pops to modify the camshafts. Ota had raced a Yoshimura-tuned CB125 before, and he trusted Pops completely. This was the first CB750 Pops got his hands on. Pops didn't believe in chasing peak horsepower numbers that only showed up on a dyno. He believed in building engines that worked everywhere on a racetrack. That meant torque, smooth, strong power that hit early and stayed strong through the rev range. He started with camshafts. Most tuners in 1971 were using machines to design cams. Pops ground his by hand. He would shape a cam lobe with an oil stone, measure it with a dial gauge, grind it again, and measure it again. Over and over until it matched what he wanted. The camshafts he made had different lift and duration profiles than anything else on the market. They were designed to make strong mid-range power, not just peak horsepower at 10,000 RPM. Next came bigger pistons. The CB750 had a 61mm bore and 63mm stroke for 736cc total displacement. Pops bored the cylinders out to 64mm and installed pistons originally designed for the Honda CB350 twin. That increased displacement to 812cc. Later, he developed a 64.5mm piston kit for 823cc and eventually a 65mm kit for 836cc. Bigger displacement meant more air moving through the engine, which meant the cylinder head needed work. Pops polished the intake and exhaust ports by hand until they were mirror smooth. He shaved 1mm off the cylinder head to increase compression. He installed heavy-duty valve springs that could handle higher RPM without floating. He lightened and polished the crankshaft to reduce friction. For carburetors, he used Cayenne CR Racing carbs. These were designed for race bikes and flowed more air than the stock carbs. Honda also supplied closed-ratio transmissions through Honda RSC, their racing parts division. All of this added up to the engines that made 97 horsepower instead of 67. That's a 45% increase in power, but the real advantage wasn't the peak number. The advantage was how that power delivered. Yoshimura engines made strong torque from 6,000 RPM all the way to redline. Riders could short shift, run lower in the rev range, and still get violent acceleration. The power was always there. While Pops was developing big bore kits, he was also working on something that would change motorcycles forever. He was inventing the 4-into-1 exhaust system. Most CB750s came with 4 separate exhaust pipes, one for each cylinder, each ending in its own muffler. That was heavy and inefficient. Some racers tried 4-into-2 systems, where cylinders 1 and 4 merged into one pipe and cylinders 2 and 3 merged into another. That was better, but still not ideal. Pops had been experimenting with exhaust systems on Honda sports cars at the Akigawa factory. He had a dynamometer for testing, and he spent countless hours trying different pipe diameters, lengths, and collector positions. What he discovered was that merging all 4 exhaust pipes into one collector created a strong flow effect that sucked exhaust gases out of the engine faster. That increased power across the entire rev range. The trick was getting the pipe lengths exactly right so that the exhaust pulses from each cylinder arrived at the collector in the correct order. The CB750 fires cylinders in the 1, 2, 4, 3 sequence. If the exhaust pulses reached the collector in the same order, they created a smooth flow instead of turbulence. That flow increased exhaust velocity, which helped the engine breathe better and made more power. By early 1971, Pops had developed a working 4-into-1 system. It was made from black steel pipe with a short, straight muffler. Nothing fancy. But when you heard it running, the sound was completely different from anything else. It had a deep roar at low RPM that turned into a clear high note as the engine revved up. The sound got people's attention, but the performance was what mattered. The 4-into-1 exhaust added power everywhere in the rev range without making the engine peaky or hard to ride. It was exactly the kind of solution Pops always looked for: simple, effective, and reliable. In late 1970, Yoshimura received an inquiry from Pennsylvania. A Honda dealership called Krause Honda wanted engines tuned for the 1971 Daytona 200. The owner, Ronald Krause, knew that Honda wasn't sending a factory team to Daytona that year. He decided to enter his own team and keep the CB750's reputation strong. Race results mattered for sales, and Krause wanted to prove the CB750 could win. An American ex-soldier who had been a Yoshimura customer in Japan helped make the connection. Krause contacted Pops and asked if he could build race engines. Pops said yes. For the Krause Honda CB750s, Yoshimura provided the full treatment: high lift camshafts, big bore pistons for 812cc displacement, head porting and shaving, lightened crankshaft, heavy-duty valve springs, Cayenne CBR carbs, close ratio transmission. The engines made 97 horsepower, 30 more than stock. Krause Honda entered 2 bikes at the 1971 Daytona 200, ridden by Gary Fisher and Roger Ryman. Fisher was a rookie. Ryman was a former Harley-Davidson factory rider and a 3-time Daytona winner. These were serious riders on serious bikes. At Daytona in March 1971, the Yoshimura-tuned bikes were fast. Fisher led early in the race. He was running with Grand Prix veterans and AMA champions. The CB750 was hanging with them on the high banking and the back straight. It was the fastest bike on the track. Then on lap 10, the cam change snapped. Fisher rolled to a stop. The bike was done. Ryman's bike had similar problems. Neither bike finished the race. It didn't make headlines, but people noticed. A tuned CB750 from a small Japanese shop had led Daytona for 10 laps. They got attention in the racing world. Ronald Krause was satisfied enough with the performance that he asked Pops to keep working with his team for the rest of the 1971 season. Pops knew the Daytona performance proved the engines were strong, but he also knew he had something else ready. The 4-into-1 exhaust was finished, and it was time to show it to the world. In June 1971, Pops' son Fujio flew to the United States to support the Krause Honda team. With Fujio preparing the bikes, Krause entered the 5th round of the AMA Road Racing Series at Pocono International Raceway. The team was testing and learning. By October, Pops was ready for the big reveal. The final round of the 1971 AMA Road Racing Series was the 250-mile race at Ontario Motor Speedway in California. Ontario was a major track near Los Angeles with a huge grandstand and a reputation for fast racing. Pops decided that the Ontario 250 would be where the 4-into-1 exhaust made its official debut. The Krause Honda CB750 showed up with its distinctive yellow paint job, a long aluminum seat cowl, and the world's first 4-into-1 exhaust system. Gary Fisher was riding. When the bikes fired up for the warm-up, People swarmed the Krause Honda paddock. Nobody had ever heard that sound before. The exhaust note was different, deep and smooth at low RPM, rising to a clear howl at high RPM. It didn't sound like anything else on the grid. Then the race started, and the Krause Honda was fast. Fisher posted the fastest lap in qualifying. The bike turned out to be incredibly quick, but in the final race, things didn't work out. The bike had problems and didn't finish. Still, everyone who was there remembered the sound and the speed of that yellow CB750 with the strange black pipe. After the success at Ontario, Krause Honda decided to return to Daytona in 1972. Fujio stayed in the United States to build the race bikes. Pops returned to Japan and kept developing the 4-in-1 exhaust. He knew he could extract even more power. For the 1972 Daytona 200, Krause Honda entered 2 CB750s again. Gary Fisher and Roger Ryman were riding. The race was on March 12th. When Pops arrived at Daytona International Speedway, he saw something he didn't expect. The 4-in-1 exhaust was everywhere. Small tuning shops all over America had copied the design and were selling their own versions. Bikes all over the grid had 4-in-1 pipes. Most of them were crude copies, but the idea had spread like wildfire. Pops was fascinated. In Japan, Honda's engineers had rejected the 4-in-1 concept when he first showed it to them. They didn't believe it would work. But in America, racers and tuners saw the performance and immediately understood. What got their attention first was probably the sound, but once they tested the pipes, they realized the power gains were real. The 1972 Daytona 200 was dominated by two-stroke bikes. Suzuki and Kawasaki showed up with factory 750cc two-strokes that made over 100 horsepower. These were purpose-built race bikes, not street bikes with modifications. They were fast and brutal. Early in the race, the two-strokes led, but they were also hard on tires and had reliability problems. By lap 10, several of the factory two-strokes had retired with mechanical issues or tire problems. The Krause Honda CB750s moved up. For 27 laps out of a 57-lap race, the Yoshimura-tuned bikes led the Daytona 200. Gary Fisher and Roger Ryman were trading the lead back and forth. The 4-stroke Hondas were running at the front of one of the most important races in the world. Then on lap 27, disaster struck. Fisher came out of the 18-degree banking near the grandstand still in the lead. Then his oil tank cracked. Oil sprayed everywhere. The bike lost pressure and had to retire. A few laps later, Ryman's bike had the same failure. Both bikes were out. Don Emder won the race on a Yamaha 352 stroke. It was the smallest engine ever to win the Daytona 200. But the story everyone remembered was the Yoshimura CB750s leading for half the race. After Daytona, demand for Yoshimura parts exploded. American riders wanted the big bore kits, the camshafts, and especially the 4-in-1 exhausts. The performance was proven, the sound was legendary. Everyone wanted a Yoshimura pipe on their CB750. In 1972, 2 American employees from Flying Tiger Line, a military cargo airline, started visiting the Akigawa factory. Their names were Dale Alexander and Star Thompson. Alexander was a flight engineer. Thompson was a pilot. They flew cargo planes between the United States and Asia. They were secretly transporting Yoshimura performance parts on their cargo flights. High-lift camshafts, big-bore piston kits, 4-in-1 exhaust pipes. They would load the parts onto the planes in Japan and fly them to California. Then they would sell the parts in America for their own profit. The recent race reports from Daytona and Ontario, plus the growing reputation of the 4-in-1 exhaust, made their side business very profitable. American riders were hungry for Yoshimura parts, and Alexander and Thompson were providing them. At some point, Alexander and Thompson approached Pops with a business proposal. They suggested establishing a company in the United States. It would be a 50-50 joint venture. The Yoshimuras, Pops and Fujio, would provide the parts and the technical knowledge. Alexander and Thompson would provide the American market access and business connections. Pops agreed. In late 1972, they founded Yoshimura Racing in Simi Valley, California. Simi Valley was in the northwest corner of the greater Los Angeles area, about 40 miles from downtown. The workshop was clean and spacious, like a prosperous American race team facility. It was nothing like the small factory in Akigawa. By the end of 1972, Yoshimura Racing was selling 4-in-1 exhaust pipes to American customers. Fujio moved to California and worked as a test rider. Using the same knowledge he gained developing the original 4-in-1 system in Japan, the American operation was up and running. Less than a year after the 1972 Daytona 200, Yoshimura had changed 4-stroke engine tuning forever. The modifications Pops developed became the standard approach for inline 4-cylinder motorcycles, high-lift camshafts, cylinder head porting, big bore displacement kits, and the 4-in-1 exhaust system. Every tuner in America started copying these solutions. Some did it well, most did it poorly. But the ideas spread fast because the performance gains were undeniable. A properly tuned CB750 with Yoshimura parts could make 97 horsepower and pull hard from 6,000 RPM to redline. That was race-winning power in 1972. The 4-into-1 exhaust became so popular that motorcycle tuners and parts manufacturers all over the world started making their own versions. By 1973, you could buy 4-into-1 pipes from dozens of companies. Most were cheap limitations, but the concept Pops invented became the standard exhaust design for 4-cylinder motorcycles. Every sports bike for the next 30 years used some version of that idea. Pops, as usual, didn't bother taking out a patent. He could have owned the rights to the 4-into-1 design and made millions in licensing fees. Instead, he kept building parts and racing bikes. That was always his focus. Make it work, make it fast, win races. In 1973, Yoshimura Racing in Simi Valley was enjoying success. In March, they set world speed records with a Kawasaki Z1 at Daytona Speedway. In June, a Yoshimura tuned CB500 won the Isle of Man production TT race. In August, they set 7 world speed records at Bonneville. In September, Yoshimura-powered Kawasaki Z1s finished in top position at the Bol d'Or 24-hour race in France. Yoshimura had become known worldwide for tuning expertise. The 4-into-1 pipe for the Kawasaki Z1 had become a huge seller. Hand-bent versions, machine-bent versions were built-in silencers. Everyone wanted them. But behind the success, there were serious problems. Dale Alexander and Star Thompson were investing business profits into personal expenses, expensive cars, luxury purchases. They weren't paying for the parts being shipped from Japan. The debt kept growing. Pops' oldest daughter, Namiko, was handling accounting at the Akagawa factory. She kept asking Alexander about the unpaid bills. He kept promising to pay as soon as he got back to Simi Valley, but the money never came. By early 1974, Pops decided to move to the United States permanently. He closed the Akagawa factory, sold the property, and moved to California with his wife Naoe and a small group of mechanics. It was the end of Yoshimura's operations in Japan, from the original shop in Fukuoka to the competition facility in Akagawa. When Pops arrived in Simi Valley in May 1974, the situation was worse than he expected. Alexander and Thompson had no intention of paying the debt. They were claiming ownership of the warehouse full of parts shipped from Japan. Their attitude was threatening. They wanted Pops to shut up and keep making parts while they ran the business. Pops had no choice but to sue his partners. The legal battle dragged on. Eventually, Pops had to start over completely. He founded a new company called Yoshimura Research and Development of America in Chino, California, about 30 miles east of Los Angeles. The work Pops Yoshimura did in 1971 and 1972 changed motorcycles in ways that are still visible today. The 4-into-1 exhaust became standard on every inline 4-cylinder sports bike for decades. Big bore kits became a common modification for riders who wanted more displacement. High-lift camshafts and head porting became standard tuning techniques. But the real lesson from that era is simpler. One man in a small workshop, grinding camshafts by hand and testing exhaust pipes with a dyno, changed an entire industry. Pops didn't have factory support. He didn't have unlimited money. He didn't have a team of engineers with computer simulations. What he had was experience, skill, and a willingness to do things his own way. When Honda's engineers said the 4-into-1 exhaust wouldn't work, Pops built it anyway and proved them wrong. When everyone else was chasing peak horsepower numbers, Pops focused on torque and mid-range power that riders could actually use. The Yoshimura name became legendary not because of marketing or hype, but because the parts worked. Riders who bolted on a Yoshimura 4-into-1 pipe or installed a big bore kit felt the difference immediately. The bikes were faster, smoother, and more reliable. That reputation spread by word of mouth, from rider to rider, race to race. By the late 1970s, Yoshimura was building championship-winning Suzuki race bikes. Wes Cooley won back-to-back AMA Superbike championships in 1979 and 1980 on Yoshimura Suzukis. The team continued winning for decades after that. Pops died in 1995 from cancer. In 2000, he was inducted into the AMA Motorcycle Hall of Fame. His son Fujio continued running the company, and Yoshimura R&D of America is still producing exhaust systems and performance parts today. Every time you see a 4-into-1 exhaust on a sports bike, you're seeing an idea that came from a 49-year-old man in a rural Japanese workshop in 1971. He ground camshafts by hand, bent exhaust pipes until they sounded right, and built engines that changed racing. That's the Yoshimura story. No shortcuts, no compromises, just work that mattered. What do you think? Was Pops Yoshimura the real genius behind the superbike revolution? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more legends who changed the world on 2 wheels.